Hey there, this is Gimme Empathy. I'm the host, Scott Mercer. I've been away since the last episode. Been down in Melbourne this past weekend playing some shows with Harley Young and the Haymakers, and I recorded another podcast down there. I'm not going to tell you who it is, and it won't be out for a while, but I'm just going to leave you a tease of that. Been doing lots of good stuff, lots of fun things, hanging out with cool people, having a good time. This is the second part of my interview with Ian Rogers, who was the bass player for Iron On and also played in No Anchor, to local institutions of the Brisbane music scene. This interview was recorded in 2013, originally part of the last podcast project I was going to start called Only Talking Sense, and never really got off the ground. If you haven't listened to the first part, I do recommend you do that first. It should be up wherever it is you found this episode, and it goes through sort of Ian's early life and his time in Iron On. In this part of it, he talks about No Anchor, which was this doom sludge band made up of two bass players and a drummer playing extremely punishing, loud music. They were always a fiercely independent DIY band who did some really fun things just for the hell of it. And Ian's got some pretty cool stories about like the time they had their own fuzz pedal made for them, the time they had their 7-night residency that was filmed for a documentary. Ian also talks about writing his PhD that he wrote about aspiration in independent music. And towards the end, we kind of get into it about music criticism. Ian's done a bit of writing for various publications over the years. It gets pretty heady, pretty big picture about some stuff and where music is and how it's changed and that kind of thing. This interview was recorded at 4ZZZ, not in one of the studios, just in the training room, which is why there's the sound of traffic all throughout, so sorry about that. The interview pauses at one point, and I left it in because I thought it was kind of funny, because I got a message from my girlfriend at the time, Sam Kelly, saying she could cover my radio shift, which I missed the start of because this interview with Ian ran so long. Although it's presented in 2 episodes now, this actually was it was actually recorded as one marathon session in an afternoon. And I think by the end you can sort of hear me wearing out Ian. So he was a very good sport for talking to me for so long. And thanks, of course, to Sam for covering my radio shift. All right, so here it is. This is part 2 of my conversation with Ian Rogers, recorded in 2013. If you haven't listened to the first part yet, you should go back and do that now. Now. Now, in 2007, you met Alex Gillies in a club.
I believe so.
And So did you start talking about music straight away?
Yeah, probably. I mean, if you know Alex, I don't think we're going to talk about AFL.
What was it about him that made you reckon, I want to form a band with this guy?
I have to be careful with some of these, with the beginnings of No Anchor, because we told a lot of lies to everyone. Like, we made stuff up. So
okay. Why don't you tell it from the start?
I'm just trying to think if that's the actual thing that happened. I mean, I did meet Alex in a club. Like, I mean, that's pretty sure, because, you know, how else would I have met him? I mean, I didn't meet him at Rocking Horse when he worked there or anything like that. He was always the guy that would stand at the front of shows and dance. So I still went to shows twice a week, you know, right all through Iron On, all through like when Iron On was starting to fall apart. And he would always be at the front dancing to stuff. And he's quite a distinctive person. He's quite tall. He's, you know, he had this sort of rockabilly quiff thing that I didn't really, this is quite unusual at the time. It's fashionable now. And at some point I got talking to him at Rick's. I do remember that bit. And we just talked a little bit. And we mainly talked about his university degree, actually. He was enrolled in political science. And I think he knew that I was an academic or doing a PhD. And we talked a bit about that. Yeah, and then it is true. We then he was involved in Triple Z, and I was involved in Iron On, who had the tenuous relationship sort of with due process through Megan Reeder. We all got invited to some I think it was the Interpol after party when they played. And I just remember we went up, it was at the Troubadour, which is Black Bear now, and there was lots of alcohol, and I didn't know anyone, and I ended up seeing this tall guy that I was talking to a few times at Rick's, and I spoke to him, and we talked about Lightning Bolt and a lot of like noise stuff, like Melvins and things like that. I didn't realize he liked it. He didn't realize that I liked it, and I think I suggested that maybe we meet up. And I had seen him play drums not long before that, maybe between the two conversations, with a band called Go Stop Stop that was very short-lived. And I was really surprised that he could play drums a bit more conventionally, because before that he's in Look Pond with Matt Kennedy of Kitchen's Floor, and he's playing very sloppy, kind of no wave, drumming. And so I think I saw him in the pop band and went, this guy can kind of hold a beat. So maybe he's a good guy to hang out with. And
so you started jamming with him? Yeah,
and Einon's still going at this point. I should stress that this is a big part of the story about Einon that never gets told, is that, I'm pretty stroppy with Einon by the end. I'm doing this stuff like playing shows at Eskimo Joe. I've got this manager who seems like a drag. Everything about the industry side seems like a drag. Then we put the record out, it's a drag. I'm like over it. I just don't really want to. It's not that I don't want to do it. I'm already sort of subconsciously starting to think about the next thing. And so is Kate, obviously. So I start jamming in the Einon practice room with Alex every Sunday morning. And we do that for about the last 6 months of Einon and a year before we play a show.
And what kind of music were you playing in your jam sessions?
Dog shit, essentially. Like, whatever. Literally, I'm playing bass and he's playing guitar. I'm playing drums. I may have even been playing guitar at some point. And it's just whatever, like, we can play that. We wanted it to be noisy and loud. That was pretty assured. I didn't know if I would sing. I didn't know if he would sing. He sang a little bit at the beginning. And we really had to start from scratch in terms of, it's one thing to say you like Lightning Bolt and the Melvins, but I mean, that stuff's impossible to play. So we had to try and work out something. And we slowly kind of just created from scratch between the two of us could actually do. That's the beginning of the band, really. Was
the harshness of No Anchors sound a bit of a reaction to playing pop music for all those years in Einon?
Yeah, I was just completely sick of it. I mean, I loved all that music all the way through Einon. I was always the arsehole who would play like heavy metal and like kind of grim stuff in the van, and the Stooges though, and things like that. Yeah, and also I wanted to do something. I didn't want to have anything to do with the music industry sort of by the end. Even I didn't really have a big industry thing. There must be like 24 bands in Brisbane at this time who were more involved in the music industry. But from the little bit that I saw, I just didn't want a bar of it. And it wasn't because of the people or the ideology. I just hated how it slowed Einon down. Like, I was so resentful of the fact this thing that I loved so much had just been had all the energy zapped out of it. That's how I felt. But, of course, Nicola had died and done that as well. So there's all this stuff, you wanted to get away. I think I was still really, really angry about that too. So it made sense to make angry music.
So Alex came to music fairly late in life. He only started drumming when he was, 30?
Yeah,
or so?
Yeah, that's the story.
Is that the true story?
Yeah, he has that 29 breakdown where he's like, oh shit, I'm about to turn 30 and haven't done this thing I've wanted to do my whole life. So he buys a drum kit off Susie Patton from
really?
Hiroshima. Well, that's how he says. I hope that's true. And it starts learning how to play.
Learning drums so late in life, what effect do you think that had on the music that he made?
He's a very distinct drummer in his own way, like in anyone's way. Well, it helped because I wanted to play in a band. I was very I felt weird about the fact that I still wanted to play music and that I wanted to do another band, even though at this point I'm 32. And this is sort of about the time period that I'd said to myself I'd probably stop playing music if things didn't go so well with Einon. So I really wanted to. I was 32 and I didn't want to end up playing music, with some kids. Like, the idea. It was really appealing to be playing with someone who was my own age, so it wouldn't be totally embarrassing when I got on stage with someone 10 years younger than me.
And who I guess would have grown up with the same music that you did and had the same tastes.
And he was a guy around town like me. Like, we'd both lived a bunch. We'd both firmly entrenched in Brisbane's music community at this point. Him as a Triple Z person, as a interviewer and writer for Time Off, for someone who'd already been in Look Pond and toured around Australia and played, countless house shows and things like that, and made records and things like that. So it was just, that really attracted me to him. I must have been on the lookout for someone who was about my age. Of course, this all goes out the window because we get Donnie later in the band, who's 10 years younger than both of us. And he's like an absolute godsend. So
but while it was just you as a two-piece, when you started playing shows, how long had you been practicing and jamming at that point?
A year. That's a bit of this recurring thing that happens. Einon practices for a year and then plays, and No Anchor practice for a year and then plays. And my band that I'm playing in Melbourne's almost coming up to a year.
And now you're going to start playing shows?
Yeah, next weekend. So,
oh, wow.
But it would be the fastest one. I think it's 7 months.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm not a big fan of... Yeah, I don't ever really feel ready. And again, just like Einon, we got given that zoo show and so then had to do a few warm-up shows to do it. With No Anchor, a friend virtually forced us to, like, conned us into it. Like, just said, we hear you're playing in a band, you should come and do this support for us at Rick's. And we said no, and I think they threatened to just put it on the poster anyway, and then so we did it, and it was fine. It was kind of terrible, but yeah, no one cared.
So was it fun though?
Yeah, it was a ridiculous amount of fun. First show was a bit gross, and the first kind of maybe 6 months were mixed, but immediately I was pretty hooked on the whole. It was, we were both pretty jazzed on the idea.
And after jamming for a year, had you sort of nailed down what kind of sound you wanted to get out of the band yet?
No, the band's pretty all over the shop. I'm not even sure we really have that together now. But yeah, we tried a whole bunch of different stuff. And a lot of what we probably played on stage that first time would have been recorded in the months leading up to it. And there would have been a bunch of stuff behind us that disappeared forever.
Was there much of a positive reaction to what you were doing when you started playing?
Yeah, well, it helped that we're already known. Yeah, Kate was at the first show, and I'm not sure if Ross was. He may well have been, and Marisa. It was all pretty well. And we're playing with Secret Birds, Damon Black's sort of psych ensemble. The thing with No Anchor was that I was so happy to do just about anything as long as it didn't mean having to go and play a really stressful support for an international band at the zoo or somewhere else. Come and play a house show to 5 people. That sounds great. Let's do it. I was excited to do what other bands would probably consider to be really shitty shows.
You recorded your first album pretty quickly in 2008, Fire, Flood and Acid Mud with Cam Smith. So I guess being out on the scene, you would have known Cam for a while by this point.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, he reviewed some of the Einon records for a blog.
Oh, for his blog, yeah, before it would.
And I just knew him, I think, from various Around the Traps. Though I really did get to know him properly through No Anchor and recording us. And he literally came up to us after that first show and said, I want to record you guys. And we were like, yeah, I suppose that was a really encouraging thing for him to have done. And he plays a huge role in the band.
He recorded, your first few releases.
Yeah. And
the first few were also mastered by Lawrence English, who's the sort of avant-garde musician, composer guy around town. So how did you know him?
I had interviewed Lawrence for my master's degree at QT.
And he's an academic as well.
He is now, yeah, but he's had a long time affiliation with QT as a tutor and
he was my
things.
tutor there.
Oh, really? Yeah, cool. So I sort of knew Lawrence, kind of just from going to his shows and talking to him. And also through my roommate, Ben Thompson, from the Rational Academy. He was the producer, so he would often be around at the flat having coffee and things like that. And Lawrence and Alex lived very close to one another up in the hills, up in Petrie Terrace. I think around this time, Lawrence buys a piece of gear a big tube compressor that is good for mastering and starts to put the word around maybe that he wants to do some mastering. I can't remember exactly how. That's all a bit of a blur because, of course, the first album is actually a demo. We went in only with the intention of trying to work out what the songs actually sound like, and in 2 days recorded the whole thing. I think we mixed it probably in a couple of nights.
And was that successful by that measure? Did you get a better idea of what you wanted the band to be after making that album?
Yeah, it was really successful, strangely. I mean, I suppose I've been saying successful a lot during this interview, and I mean, successful for me in terms of people bought the record or seemed to enjoy it, or they wrote about it positively in a critical way. It's not. It's hard to gauge anything else past that. We made 150 CDRs and we sold them in a year. People booked us for shows a lot more after the record was out. Yeah, and it went places I didn't expect, in that it did receive some overseas press, strangely enough. This is at the point where I started to realise that more underground, weirder music was not going to be a complete sort of life sentence away from any type of attention, which I thought would happen. And yeah, it gets stocked in Rocking Horse and things like that. You know, I just didn't think that would happen. And then went on to actually do all right. Probably was selling more copies of that than the final Einon EP. It was a very unusual experience. So,
at what point did Donnie Miller join the band?
Well, around our second album. This is, again, just stuff happens all the time. We released this second album, Steam, that I am still immensely proud of, and that Alex was very happy with too. We mixed by Lawrence English in a very unusual way, and recorded by Cameron Smith. And we put this record out, and the same thing happened with the second Einon EP. People just didn't give a shit. It had 4 songs on it that were really long, and I just thought it was wonderful. I was like, this is the sort of exactly the type of like fucked up, experimental kind of music that I really wanted to hear my friends kind of play. It felt really ambitious to me, and I was like, this is great. The artwork was just a complete pain in the ass, cost thousands of dollars. It's this beautiful die-cut CD thing, and yeah, for lots of reasons, it just really didn't kind of work. Like, we had a launch and kind of oversold it out, but you know, it was like 100 people or something, and it just didn't really kind of take that well. We'd already toured a little bit after that, and we were sort of just at that point where it's hard to know kind of what to do next. We knew we'd just kind of keep making records. We weren't like upset about it, but it was really like, well, what's actually going on here? Around this time, I was in an electronic band called Axon with a guy called Tom Hall. Because it was an electronic project, it's really easy to tour that stuff, and we both went and did a 7-week tour of Europe together, which ended up killing the band stone cold dead in 7 weeks. And I came back from that, and we'd done a few demo recordings, and I was really quite burnt out as a music person, and I felt really strongly that the only things I didn't like about Steam came from the fact that it was really hard to make a decision in the band with Alex and I, because it only takes one person to say no if there's 2 of you, and then it doesn't happen.
What was the recording process like compared to Iron On, when it was just the 2 of you and Alex?
Oh God, it was infinitely different. You know, with most of it's, just about all of it's recorded live. There's overdubbing, but there's no tracking. So in terms of Alex lays the drums down and then I come down at a later time and actually record the bass, that didn't happen at all. It's all pretty much done.
All live.
Yeah, the beds are done live, and then they're kind of bolstered and added to and things like that. So they're really fast records to make. Again, that's completely about me getting to the end of Iron On and saying it shouldn't take 2 weeks to make an EP that no one's going to listen to anyway. That costs $7,500. Instead, we go and made a whole album in a weekend, and it sounds like it, but it costs $150, and people bought it and liked it. So, did
you find you took on more of a leadership role in No Anchor?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, Alex is pretty. He was not backwards and coming forwards. He always says. I can remember once he sort of jokes, I think, that I'm the boss. But I think that's kind of partly because it's fun to make fun of me, because I can be quite stroppy creatively. I suppose I am the boss a little bit in terms of, and I probably did book most of the shows in the band's done. I've probably been responsible for that, and for the tour details like booking planes and accommodation if necessary. I also drive. I used to drive a lot, do all the driving for the band around town. I was the guy with the car, but that changed a bit with Donnie.
So Donnie came in after the second album?
Yeah, after the second album, I come back from this tour of Europe, And I think I just was at the point where the idea of going back into the rehearsal room with Alex alone and us just having to kind of, between the two of us, try and come up with another record that I thought was as good as Steam. Even though no one else really cared, I thought it was great. I just thought, going to the next, doing something beyond Steam would just been really hard. I actually couldn't work out how to do it. I'm like, I'm very happy with this. I can't better it. I don't want to better it. I just want to do something different, not something better than this. And so, I don't know. I think I suggested that we should try and get another bass player. And that was because that seemed like the dumbest thing that we could do. Like, what would be I think we may have even discussed having a second drummer. Not as well, but or a second drummer. Just someone else to have some other stake in it. Yeah. Come up with some ideas about what to do, But the second bass player ended up being great.
So why did you go for a second bass player rather than, I guess, the more conventional choice would have been a guitarist?
Yes. There's plenty of people who would have done that happily. Well, because we got so much attention and so much... I got away with so much creatively too, because if you play a No Anchor song on a guitar, it kind of can just sound like pretty boring stoner rock. But the different textural qualities of the bass, and because I've always been known for bass, it added a lot to it. It was just a point of differentiation. It's kind of a straight marketing 101. You want your product to be a bit different. It doesn't have to be that you can write better songs than other people.
Just that no one else in Brisbane has two bass players?
At the time, no one did. At the time, there were a little bit of drone metal sort of stuff happening. It all fell away pretty quickly, but there was no one else that I can think of. Though DZ, they're sort of doing this they use some of the similar techniques to me in terms of use octave and the two. I don't think we really influence one another at all. Though I have to admit, I did hear the DZ record when we were making the No Anchor one. So, I may have borrowed bits and pieces that I'd heard in that. Also, I think they may have made the record with Cam because they'd heard that he could make a big sounding record with two people.
Yeah.
With the No Anchor one.
So did you know Donnie before, or did you just place an ad again?
We actually put a blog post up where I was very particular about what I wanted. I think there was 10 rules that you had to follow, and they were just stupid
selection criteria.
Yeah, it was an actual selection criteria from my days in the public service. I wrote it in that language. I said, must have a demonstrated ability you weren't allowed to have a bass that looked like a potato. You had to play with a pick. You couldn't play with your fingers. So I just completely read the riot act. You had to have gear that looked a certain way. Like I said, you couldn't have certain types of bass guitars. It had to be a certain thing. Alex and I are politically quite eye to eye. We're both adamantly sort of left. We're both in long-term relationships at this point with our partners, and so we don't really want to be around any sort of racist, sexist, jerk-off sort of person that you might get if you put an ad in the paper. So all that's in there too. Don't even bother turning up to the first practice if you're just some munter. You got to know what you're getting into. Don't expect a tour. Don't expect anything. And at this time, Donnie kind of was in Butcherbirds as the drummer. So I'd sort of seen him on stage, and in the Butcherbirds, he's the guy that plays Electric Wizard in the van when they go on tour. So immediately, Joe Nilsson says you should get my friend Donnie to come and be in the band. I think Donnie's also having a bit of has had some, is in a bit of a bad place, just had some life issues, trouble. And so he really, I think I sort of remember Joe saying Donnie's kind of he could really use something else to do. And I think it'd be nice for him to hang out with you and Gillies and play some drone metal. And also Ben Salter, Joe's boyfriend at the time. He stopped me in the street and said, "You've got to get Donnie. Don't even interview anyone else. Don't, And he actually trusts Ben's judgment on stuff like that. And so that's what we did. We met Donnie for a beer, and immediately I was kind of sold. He had the same hair as Buzz from the Melvins, and he owned a van, and he owned a Sutton amplifier. I was just I'm pretty sure. I sort of by this point we'd kind of done a lot of work on getting Gillies up to speed as a certain type of drummer. I was pretty confident that I could teach someone to play bass if they couldn't. Of course, he could play bass a lot better than me. I didn't, it worked pretty well.
All right, so Donnie's joined No Anchor. Now you guys have a very distinct dynamic with the two basses. Mm-hmm. He sort of plays the lower riffs, and you play would you say it's fair to say that he plays the lower stuff and you generally play the lead bass, if you will?
No, it's the other way. I play the sub, and like that. I'm sort of the more traditional bass player, but that's kind of a pointless thing to say in No Anchor. But yeah, more broadly, I am playing the lower, bassier stuff, and he is playing the screechier, higher stuff. Though we switch around.
Yeah,
a bit,
you do. Yeah.
But often what I'm playing is kind of mixed a little bit more to the center, like where a traditional bass would be when you're making a record. So I've noticed that.
At what point did you get your Rickenbacker?
I got that for Iron-On years ago from a second-hand guitar store out, I think in the Gap or past there, like a long way away. I'm coming up from Victoria Point, so it's taking me an hour to drive over there. It's also where I bought a basement amplifier, which I still love. It was about $1,800 at the time, a second hand. It was actually a bit too much to pay for it. But at the time, you couldn't find them. Like, it was in Brisbane. I don't know what was going on, but I knew they were $3,500 or something, and you could very rarely find one. I'd never seen a second hand one ever. And Dean Turner from Magic Dirt used to play this Rickenbacker, and I just thought, yeah, he's been a huge, huge influence on my playing over the years. So I really wanted it. And I ended up trading I had some boutique pedals that I'd been lucky enough to find in a second-hand guitar store down at Capalaba that I sold in exchange for the Rickenbacker plus some cash. And yes, that's the end of it. And now the Rickenbacker has been completely destroyed so many times that it is functionally worthless as a guitar. Like Tim has done so much work on it. It's virtually a Tim guitar instead of a Rickenbacker now. I always joke I'm really disappointed that I never became really famous and successful, because that's really the only way that I'd ever get money back on that guitar, as if it was Ian Rogers' bass.
All the money you've put into it for repairs over the years.
Oh, and in terms of just the resale value, you know, if I was famous, then someone might buy it on eBay for an inflated price, and I might get my money back. But there's no way I'm selling that bass now. Like, it would probably be worth $500 if that.
You've known Tim Brennan of Tim Guitars for a long time.
I have, yeah.
You're probably one of the very few bands in the world that has their own signature gain pedal, the Real Gain Supernova. Was it your idea or Tim's idea to have your own pedal?
It was Tim. I mean, Tim's like, without any hesitation, I say he's probably one of the most influential and helpful people in Brisbane music. I mean, it is impossible to talk about the history of Brisbane music now without talking about Tim's influence. He's absolutely integral to it. And in ways that are both obvious and that are about, Tim is not someone who really needs to tell everyone about what he does. He's happy to just know that he did it. And with the pedal, though, this is so typically Tim Brennan, right? I mean, as if the dude doesn't have enough fucking work to do, running the store and making all this thing, and trying to feed his family and do all this stuff. He lends Donovan a gain pedal one night, and Donnie plays it at practice, and I've got my camera there, my video camera. I think it was like my phone camera, and I just shot some video of him playing it, and we were just joking around. I said, this is our road testing gear, and our road test for the gear was just to play a raucous doom riff for about 5 minutes and record it, and then we're like, so I give that 5 stars. It's like a bit of a joke on those YouTube reviews.
Yeah.
It's totally silly, and I happened to put it on our website because I thought it was funny. And he saw it and went, oh, you've literally just advertised my pedal. And I'm like, well, do you really think that, And he said, I'll make you a gain pedal. That'll be really, this sort of noise thing that you guys are joking about. And that's what he did. Like, he literally went, oh, how about we make a pedal that is like it's 10 times as powerful, I think, as that one, and we'll call it, it'll be the No Anchor pedal. And then he took, I don't know if this is too boring in terms of technical detail. It's a a wonderful gain pedal, and it has the tone knob is actually the same circuitry as the Big Muff pedal, which I use. So it's this weird hybrid between what Donnie uses and what I use.
And is Donnie that the double boost, the Tim one he uses?
I think it was the double boost or something that he had, and I just know that someone told me once that the actual circuitry of the real gain Supernova literally makes your signal 100 times louder. It's like 10. Each boost is by magnitude of 10, so it's by 10 by 10, and it's pretty funny because there's been reports of people saying, "Oh, my real gain Supernova came in the mail today" on Facebook. Being really excited that they got the no anchor pedal, and then like the next day it says, "Does anyone know a guy who can repair tube amps in the suburb?" It's pretty gnarly. Unfortunately, I can't. I use the pedal quite a bit on recordings. I can't use it live because I have a compressor on my bass head, and what happens is as soon as I click it on, it hits the compressor so hard that when I click it off, it takes like half a second for the compressor to release, and so it cuts my whole signal.
No Anchor have had 4 albums now, plus a bunch of singles and things you've contributed to. And you do fit into a general sound category of loud and abrasive and sludgy, but there's actually quite a lot of variation within that overall theme across all your releases. What is the songwriting process like within the band, and how does it change over time?
At the beginning, it was really about what we could do, and now it's much more about, well, it's still about that, and like that's really probably the only technical definition of what a no anchor song is that it's like what we can physically do. So we've all, we've tried to do covers of some of our favourite bands and can't do them. Like some of them we've been more successful with, like Boris and Big Black, but we tried to cover Unsane, a huge influence on the band, and just physically couldn't play it. So there's that element. More recently, I have brought in whole songs. Like I've said, I've just written this at home, and very recently the band's sort of been able to play them. Like I brought it in, and I'm not sure whether that's because I can now write for what everyone's going to be able to do, or whether that's just what's going on exactly. But that's a bit more common. Mostly we just get together in the practice room, and someone will either have a riff and we'll jam on that, or we'll literally just go, okay, 1, 2, 3, and then play until we hear something that we like, and then meticulously try and piece that together into a song. And that can be a long process over like weeks of. It's not uncommon for us to have, well, when we were all like more active, like 4 or 5 songs open that we're working on.
Sorry, I'll just check.
No, you're right.
Might be my girlfriend. Awesome. Yeah, she can start my show. So is there a time like you have to bleed by? Or?
No, not really. I can kind of just. Everyone's just sort of. Yeah, it's pretty cash.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, you'll definitely be out by 5. Cool.
Okay, let me just text my people. There we go. Yeah.
So for the songs that have vocals in them, do you write the lyrics?
Well, the ones that I sing, yes.
And so Donnie writes for the ones that he sings?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
A lot of your lyrics are quite funny in a
Thank you.
satirical and sarcastic kind of way. Do you think that sometimes that gets lost a bit because the delivery is screamed?
Yeah, maybe. I think there's definitely maybe overseas. Like so in Australia, I think everyone's who's got an interest in the band has probably seen us if they live in a capital city, apart from Perth. But yeah, and also the presentation of the band in terms of photos is usually pretty. Like if you really look at the photos, you can kind of tell that we're not heavy metal dorks. Like we've kind of dorks, normal dorks. So we always try and have that in there. So that's why like Donnie will be holding cats and stuff like that in the photos, or
he has a lot of cats.
Yeah, he has all the cats or something like that, just to sort of say that this is really not heavy metal as such. It's influenced by it, but it's not really that way. We do occasionally. I find that there's people who contact us from overseas who probably don't quite understand that we're not these brutal dudes. And the comedy, well, no one really understands. I don't know. No, you're probably one of the first people who've actually like properly told me that you thought the lyrics were funny. I think they're really funny.
Yeah.
And that's sort of why I write them, to amuse myself. It's very much about having to have the lyrics there to add some sort of human presence in the song. I think Alex would probably be perfectly happy if the band was instrumental. That's what says a lot about his taste, though. He likes instrumental music. I always wanted there to be vocals, so I just like bands that have singers more than bands that don't.
Do you think having verses adds structure to the songs?
Like vocals and things.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I've actually done that in the past. I've used the vocals as a structuring device, like having it be the thing that kind of holds the song together.
Is it like your last bit of you still grasping onto pop music?
Yeah, well, the pop. No, not the last. Like, one of many like crossovers in terms of.
I guess some of the riffs are pretty poppy as well.
The attention to hooks and song structure is something that Ross and Kate taught me, and which I'll be forever in debt to them for. I didn't know what a middle eight was or anything like that, or I didn't really understand that you had to bridge verses and choruses and things like that. And they really taught me how that stuff worked. And they also made me able to listen to it and hear it in other music. Like when you are quite openly trying to write music that people will want, that will hook people, that will bring people in, like we were at various points in Iron On. You realise that most music that is any good actually works on those principles.
Even if it is superficially, I guess, more hardcore or sonically abrasive.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, the classic example was, to answer your question, right from the very beginning, people have noticed that for a band that's so noisy, it's quite catchy.
Yeah.
And that's me and Iron On, really. I mean, that's kind of my contribution. I think if Alex had his way sometimes, it'd be a lot more off kilter and skonky kind of and crazy. But we one day when we were making up some records, we were sitting around his kitchen table folding stuff and cutting, and he put on Sepultura's album Roots, Bloody Roots, and we listened to the song, and it's just a pop song. I said, listen to it. It's like verse, chorus, verse. There's 4 measures of each one. The chorus is just the verse, but with distortion on. It's like virtually a song that the Veronicas could have written, except for it's screamed instead of, yeah.
I find even some of your songs that don't have lyrics, I guess Black Sabbath in particular, is kind of a funny song.
Yeah.
Even if just from the title and then with the music.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bit of a musical, I don't want to say a musical joke because that makes it sound superficial, but it's amusing.
Oh, it's really amusing. I mean, that's the sort of, that riff, we really like doing that. Like, that's what we really like doing in the room is like Donnie plays a riff or I play a riff that everyone in the room just goes, that's just so ridiculous and so outrageous. And like the best heavy metal's all like that. You just, you're kind of in awe of it because it's so, I don't know, it's funny and it's powerful at the same time. And it makes you not think about things. Like, it's distracting. And that's sort of what, so Donnie brought in that riff and we played around with it. And then we went out and his girlfriend Inez we demoed it that night. And after we demoed it, she said, I reckon that's in the genre of Black Sabbath. And immediately I was like, that's it. We should call the album that, not just the.
You were originally going to be part of a band that became Tiny Spiders.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's true.
So, was it you that initially approached Cam on forming a sort of noisy pop band?
No. I think Inez was already there. Oh gosh, I'd totally forgotten about that. Yeah, probably because it was so traumatic. I had one rehearsal with them and I fucking sucked so bad. I hadn't played the guitar in quite some time and they already had stuff together and the band was already pretty great except for at that point Inez was playing bass. And yeah, it's just I had nothing really. I don't know why. There was also a definite lag time around that period where I just wasn't very creative with a lot of things. I don't think I wrote many No Anchor songs or anything around that time. I just remember thinking, I should do this. Cam's asked me I should do this because I really need to break the circuit somehow and find something else to do. And being in the room with them and going, it's not doing that. Like, I'm just not, all I'm doing is sucking. Like, it's not actually helping. I'm not helping them, and they're certainly not helping me. And luckily we're good enough friends where I just, I felt awful after that. It's pretty funny.
They turned out all right, though.
Yeah, they turned out great. I think maybe that was part of it. I think my critic part of my brain was saying, what are you musting? Don't mess this up.
Yeah.
What's going on already is really great,
So No Anchor have a fairly DIY approach to how do you do everything, really, too. I mean, you play gigs at this point occasionally since you moved to Melbourne. You record everything in Donnie's house. Mm-hmm. You don't do a lot of promo. You played a show last night, your first in Brisbane in what?
Couple of months.
Yep. And you have, like, not a big crowd, but a dedicated crowd. Mm-hmm. Working without the traditional promotional tools, how do you think you get this sort of dedicated following?
Well, last night was a bit of a mess. We didn't mess up, but we didn't do everything that we could have to promote the show. I don't know. I suppose what we do is fairly extreme in a way. Like, sonically, it's quite extreme, and there isn't not that I can think of offhand. Maybe in parts of heavy metal that I don't really go to in Brisbane, or parts of extreme noise music that I don't often find myself in, we're probably the most sort of brutalizing kind of experience that you could have at a certain point, like, and still be watching a band that's got guys in it who are not, like, I suppose they're interested in other things apart from the fact that it's also brutalizing. Like, so we've got that kind of crossover thing happening between songs and noise and things like that. But there really isn't too many bands like No Anchor. You can't get that live experience with too many other things.
No, definitely.
You can in Melbourne. Like, you can go and see Whitehorse, and it's like, it's gnarly as hell. And others, cities. But yeah, we kind of have a bit of a lock on what we do down here, I think, so there's not really much need to promote it. People who like what we do, they're gonna be
informed about that sort of thing. Anyway.
Yeah, they're gonna either probably be aware of what the band does, and they're probably not gonna have. I find that a lot of the people who come to the shows, it's not like they were at a doom metal show last week and now they're at our one. It's like we're probably like the heaviest thing they listen to in a live setting.
Is it a lot less stressful organising things for No Anchor than it was for Iron On, because you don't have to play the same publicity games with Triple J and all that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep, totally. I literally do not do anything in No Anchor that I don't want to do. So if I don't feel like doing something, I just don't do it. So I'm like, no, it can't be fucked. No, it just doesn't happen. Luckily, we're pretty motivated. But there's been times in the past where, we haven't sent records out because we're just like, you know what, no. Just don't actually think that this is a record that we want every single person in the world to know about. This is just for, like, we have a rule in the band that if it gets recorded, it gets released. So everything that comes into the band, no matter how bad it is, if it gets to the point where it's sort of song-based enough to get recorded, then it gets released. And that's been a pretty helpful thing to have over the years. It also makes you less precious about things. So there's been stuff where I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm not going to do anything for that at all, really. And with shows too, it can be a bit like that too. There's sometimes where I'm trying to think if we turn down stuff, but we often won't turn down things, but there must be something that we've kind of just I don't know. We were a bit more like that in the earlier on. We were just much more interested in doing exactly what we wanted to do.
A couple of years ago, you had a 7-night residency at the Waiting Room, the 7 Nights of No Anchor, that was made into a short documentary as well. Who organised that, and what was the genesis of that idea?
Yeah, well, that's a great example of... Thank you. That's the one I should have reached for with that last question. Is that, we just wanted to play 7 nights in a row, and so we just did it. Like, and you forget. It's so easy to forget that in music that you don't actually have to do what you're supposed to do. You really don't. It's like pretty open. It's like performance art. You can do anything, right? It's like, so, and including, this is, you know, people ask me this question, they, oh, you know, it's amazing what you guys did and blah, blah, blah. Well, what we really did is just ripped off another band, because Warped, this band from Melbourne, did this same 7-night residency as a tour to get ready to go on tour once in Melbourne. And when I was a kid, I read about it in a magazine. And for some reason, at some point, like in No Anchor, I realized that Alex and Donnie were up for just about anything. And so I talked about it. I said, oh, I remember this band Warped who I really liked. They did this 7 nights thing. Maybe we could do it one year. And then we got a touring grant. And I just made, and Cam Smith, who's already like completely influential in the band's history, happens to run a venue. I mean, it would have been kind of a bit shit for us not to do it. Weak it would have been.
Is it true that you play different material on every single night?
Yeah, well, a different set. And yeah, a lot of different material. You would have been very unlucky to see like more than a few songs if you went that was similar if you went like 3 nights, for example. One night was fully improvised. That was terrible. A bit of that's on the tape that we put out. One night was all old material, roughly like from the first 2 albums. Maybe the first 2 nights were roughly like that. One night was all new material. One night was all of Real Pain, Supernova. One night we played all the covers that we could think of, and 1 or 2 other things. Yeah, it wasn't, of course, our ambition, because we're not professional musicians, we've got other responsibilities. Of course, when we planned it, you know, one night's going to be the entirety of Fire Flood and Acid Mud, start to finish. Of course, I can't even play some of those songs anymore.
Was it personally successful for you?
Oh, yeah, hands down. I think we all are pretty agreed that it's probably the best thing we've ever done with the band. In terms, on every level, like it was absolutely amazing. Like it was amazing professionally, if that's even the right way to describe it with a band like ours, in that we played every night for 7 nights, so we got good, like in a way that by the end we were pretty well play anything with our eyes closed, and that it's not something that you get much of an opportunity to do all that often in Australia. You're usually doing it on tour, where you've got all the baggage of having to travel on top of trying to be good. Going home every night and then just playing, yeah. Being on tour but never having to not sleep in your home bed, it was like pretty great. Socially, it was just an absolute blast. We had some funding for it, and I can remember, it's all done now, so I don't mind talking about it. I spent quite a bit of it on getting all of our guests drunk. We had a couple of cases of beer every night, and the bands who supported us played for nothing, virtually, like for $30 or $40, but on the proviso that they would drink for free, which at the time Alex and I debated a little bit back and forth, because, you know, we had some funding, so maybe I could have like made it like $50 to $100 or something like that. But I just thought, no, this is going to be about No Anchor as a local band, having a party with our friends. I just knew, personally, if I was in a band and someone said you can have like $100 for an appearance fee, or you can have like a $30 or $40, but everyone in the band can have as much beer as they like, I know which way I'm going. And I hedged my bets that way, and I think it worked pretty well. Lots of people seemed to have a very nice time. I did. Yeah, good.
I think I went on the Tuesday or Wednesday. The one at the Legend. After that. Yeah. I really liked his set, actually.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah,
Everett.
I like his music a bit more than his writing, actually. So you moved to Melbourne in January. So what does that mean for the future of No Anchor?
This is pretty topical, actually, because we're still trying to work that out, and it's come to a head, you know, this week while I've been here. I don't know, to be honest. I think that it hasn't all been agreed upon yet between everyone in the band, but that we have been talking about the fact that we might make what is already a pretty informal hiatus a bit more formal, in terms of we put the record out while I was away. I was in Berlin when the album came out, which is more proof that you don't actually have to do anything that anyone tells you to do. You can put the record out and not do a single show just to promote it, and it actually sold as well as the album before it. So What we've done this year is I felt like it's just all the shows we would have done last year if I was actually in the country. So I'm been quite happy this year to just play a lot of the Golden Bridge tracks on stage for the first time, and play occasionally like bits and pieces of like new stuff, like the single that we just put out last night. But that's it now in terms of all of our recorded content is released after last night. Donnie's band Roku Music is starting to become a pretty serious concern, and Alex's artwork is, as his woodcut work is becoming more and more of a concern, and also he's in a band now with a new band as well, and I'm in a new band in Melbourne, and I think nothing's locked in stone yet, and I don't think we'll probably even say anything, but I think that it's pretty unlikely that we'll play next year. I think we might just sort of say no to everything next year instead of most things like we did this year. Just because I don't really want to get on stage much more, personally. My bandmates might totally, after this interview, they may talk me out of this, but personally, I don't want to get on stage after this year and just play the same songs. Like, it was all about writing new material and being creative, and it's just, I don't want next year to just be a reunion show every 3 months.
So what's the new project you're part of in Melbourne?
It's a band called Shaking Hell at the moment. Is
that named after the Sonic Youth song?
Yeah, well, it's a very Sonic Youth sounding band. So I'm in an alternate tuning on guitar, and it's very loud and noisy, but it's completely melodic as well. So it's a bit of a throwback to bits and pieces of Einon and No Anchor. So
there's a great band I saw at a house party a couple months ago. I think they're called the Wendy's. It was their first gig, and they sound exactly like Sonic Youth, like about circa 1986. Yep. They were so good. Like, they had the dynamics were identical. Like, you could tell exactly when it was going to shift to a different bit, and they had the rat pedals, and it was just it was amazing set. I have not been able to find a trace of them since that.
The Wendy's.
So if
Wendy or Wendy?
Wendy's.
Yeah.
I think they had to come up with a name on the night, and someone was eating ice cream or something, and they chose it for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we'll play another show as Shaking Hell, because it is so, we sound a bit like Sonic Youth, and then you named after Sonic Youth.
It might be a bit on the nose.
But then again, we're also mostly Stephen Smith, who's in the band with me, who's from Skull Hazards, the Brisbane band. We're both in our 30s and also pretty low on fucks given now, so we may just, it's a pretty good name. It's the best we can come up with.
You did, was it a PhD thesis? On what it takes to succeed as a musician according to rock biographies.
Roughly, yeah.
Roughly?
Well, it's about aspiration. So what people expect out of rock music after reading rock biographies and interacting with the media, and what actually happens. And
could you summarise the conclusion for your paper, Mr. Rogers?
Well, not really. I mean, it's kind of a 40,000 word answer, which is the size of the last chapter. Essentially, they don't marry up, right? So what you think is going to happen, what's going to happen, are usually pretty dissimilar. It's a bit different now. If you're involved in the house party scene here in Brisbane, and your main interaction with music is going to those parties, then when you go and actually play at one of those parties, it's going to pretty much be as expected. But if you have aspirations to be a musician that plays in big clubs and has that experience of what it's like, it is really different. It's not how it looks, really. It's actually a life that's pretty itinerant. It's very low income, even by by levels that still people don't understand, by the fact that most of the people that you are watching in the very top tiers of Australian music, popular music, are not being paid very well, and whose careers are extremely precarious. They might be getting $40,000 or $50,000 a year now, but to be in a big band, but this has got a shelf life of about 5-6 years, and then then they have nothing really. They have a CV that says I played in, I was the keyboardist in Summificate for 5 years or something. Not that they're part of my study, I just grabbed that name. But so yeah, it can be a bit different, and I was really interested in how local bands cope with that, because the local bands that I spoke with, they were a bit different to that. They didn't all want to be successful like rock people, but they did have ideas about how music would go. And then they're kind of confronted with some of the realities of what it's actually like. And so I was really interested in the coping mechanisms, which was the main ones. The soundbite one is that they don't really deal with failure at all. Like they just dismiss failure at every aspect. So instead of being aspiring towards success, like having this big goal and saying, that's what I want and how I'm going to get it, what they say is that nothing is a failure. Like, so
they just redefine what success is depending on where they get.
Yeah, well, you could put it that way as well.
Do you think that's happened in your own life?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is literally, in my experience, how you cope. Because, you're told from the day that you get involved in music that music is really important, that it's a big deal, that it's, we're a long way from pre-industrial music, right? Which was about patronage or about actually conveying information. And now, it's impossible to imagine music without its media involvement and things like that. So you're always dealing with some filters on the reality of it. Yeah, and that's how everyone I know deals with it. No one really talks about. If you thought that your local band that's playing, like for last night, if you thought of last night's show where we played in front of about 50 people, that is a failure compared to playing if you want to play at the zoo in front of 350 people. Or you could just decide that that's okay. 50 people is enough. That it's still like a show in which all the things that you want to happen at that show happen. And, of course, there's little bits and pieces that you can moderate in there. Like maybe it didn't sound quite the way you want to do, but it's not a complete abject failure. Also, bands do this more broadly too. Like, so instead of a band breaking up, say in my example, Einon breaking up and that being this epic failure, really Einon was just sort of the thing that got me to where I was, and then I'd sort of pivot around into No Anchor and keep playing music. It's sort of, that's sort of the way it works. It would be pretty easy to live your life thinking that this band, Einon, was an abject failure. And the only difference between that and actually believing that is kind of just the ideological, about your beliefs and values.
So your day job is as a lecturer at RMIT. What attracted you to the academic side of music?
I didn't have the best intentions, admittedly, when I first started, but this is something I found that my colleagues also share occasionally, is that I didn't really want to be an academic so much as I wanted to get the APA PhD scholarship, which was about $18,000 tax-free a year for 3.5 years. And I could virtually do anything I wanted with my time as long as that PhD got done. At the time, Einon was just about to put out Oh the Romance, I think, when I got this scholarship. And my accountant, we had an accountant. That's one of the smart things that Einon taught me, is that we got an accountant pretty early on, so that the band has been a good tax hedge. All my bands have been really good at returning my tax to me. The tax man is probably my best consumer, my best customer in terms of paying me. And my tax guy, he said to me once, if this is going to happen, it's going to happen in about 7 years. 7 to 10 years is about the rough lead. Like, I do this every day. I look at the math. If this is going to pay your rent, that's sort of like the time frame you're looking at. So if you don't have 7 years, you're kind of boned. And if you expect it before 7 years, you'd have to rip. You have to get out there and do it. And at this point, I was about 3 years in, and then I think if I get the scholarship, they'll take care of the other 3.5 years. By the end of it, I'll either be a doctor of cultural studies or Einon will be my job. And it just ended up that Einon was not my job.
Do you enjoy teaching?
Yes and no. I enjoy the research aspect of my job more than the teaching aspect, although I do enjoy teaching a lot more than, I would say a bit more than average. Oh, no, that's not true. Actually, the idea that academics dislike teaching, and that is a pretty common one, is untrue. I'm fairly able to do my job. I wouldn't say I'm the best teacher in the world, but I'm pretty able to get it done. And I find my rapport with my students really easy to come by, and I don't agree with the metrics that my university uses to judge my performance. I think that student surveys are bullshit and should be stopped. I'll say that openly in any public forum anywhere. But I prefer the research aspect of it. It's a lot more fun.
Has your economics degree ever been that useful in your musical career?
Well, it's a business degree. It has
Business
to be.
degree.
Yeah, business degree. Sorry, I just. Tremendously useful. I mean, yeah, in countless different ways, and I am involved in teaching musicians at the moment down at RMIT about various parts of what I've learned over the years, and I find that the information I know about the culture of music is as valuable as the stuff I know about the business of it. I mean, I don't regret doing the business degree. I occasionally regret the 5 years in the public service because it's a waste of time, but I don't ever really regret the schooling I got in business, even though it was boring as hell. Like, I wouldn't recommend it, but it is not the worst thing in the world to be a musician with a business degree. That's like a pretty good. Unfortunately, that's actually a pretty good start.
Yeah. Do you recommend studying music?
Yeah, well, it depends what you want out of it. But I mean, I couldn't not recommend it. That's what I teach. It's actually only becomes more and more rewarding as the years go on. There's some dangers in it. You know, occasionally your whole life becomes about music. You're playing music. You're on tour doing music. You record music. You listen to music and write it up for publications, and then you go to work and teach music students and do research on music. You get a bit burnt out on it occasionally.
You start to hate it just a little bit.
Yeah, well, just you get it's not so much you get to hate it. It's just it becomes hard to enjoy it, especially new music. There's just not as much there to be excited about.
You review music for a bunch of different blogs as well as your own personal blog. Mm-hmm. Why do you think it's important as a music critic to make a qualitative statement about someone else's art that's beyond just discussing it?
Yeah, that's hard. I look, to be honest, I'm not sure why. The reason I do it personally is I think is a bit idiosyncratic in that I have a lot of training in writing about music. I've been privileged and lucky enough to, had this wonderful education at university and so forth, and all these rich experiences like doing stuff. And it feels like my particular discipline in cultural studies has people in it who essentially say that if you are working in a university with all this knowledge and you do not produce work that someone who doesn't have your privilege can't access or can't understand, then you're kind of part of the problem. So I feel compelled to use my training to write about music, as sort of part of my professional thing. I also get paid to do it. So music criticism itself, I think some of that's not my best work in terms of the pithy column that I write for The Vine. Yeah, that's not... Anyone could write that if they were able to write well. Like, if you can be entertaining, then you can pretty much be a music critic, really. It helps if you can think about music critically and have ideas about music, but yeah, the number one job is to entertain the reader. The number two job is to assert your authority, your ideas onto other people, like rhetorically argue with the reader and win. And the third one, I suppose, is... Actually, no, that's 2 and 3. The first one's to get paid.
Yeah, you said that the 4 reasons that you do it are: first, to make money; second, to raise the profile of bands that you like and think deserve attention, which I think is the most noble reason, really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in a position to write about things, why wouldn't you?
Yep.
Get people out there.
That's almost like nepotistic, but like I don't care. Like everyone has power that they can exert in any position in the media, and I don't think I'm stepping over any... You're not ever stepping over any lines, really, in music writing. If you hear a piece of music and like it and say, this is good, even if your friends made it.
The third one was, you said, was to write something in a format where you have creative freedom. So, do you think...
I agree with myself. Take back my answer to that, the previous answer, yeah.
The fourth one is, you said that you write criticism for the romance of it. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a kid that, as you probably picked up earlier in the interview, was like not, I wasn't I didn't have a set of friends who I really responded to musically at high school. I had 1 or 2 friends that I could discuss music with. I lived in the pre-internet era at this point. You know, I'm 17, 16, 15, no internet. I remember when the internet was turned on at university. So my whole experience of trying to work out what music does, what it's about, how it was made, how I can find more music like the music I like, that was all coming to me through music criticism and music journalism. So it's all happening in paper magazines. And the romance of it is the fact that, you know, that stuff meant so much to me. You know, I can't even, you know, describe how much that meant to me when I was a kid. Like reading Everett True in NME or wherever else, but his zines, and just, you know, finding it really helpful and also really, really exciting. Just like being as excited by these stories about the bands as I am as the music. You know, finding out that there's this whole other side aspect of the band apart from their records, it's also really, really captivating.
To shed light on the context that may not be in the press release.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, the press, and this at that point, the press release is a long way away from my eyes because, you know, that was the style of writing back then wasn't like it is now. It hasn't been cheapened by various processes over the years.
And it is a very fine line these days between a press release and a review, a critical review.
Yeah. Well, I have advocated once or twice that they should just publish the press releases, but yeah.
in a lot of cases, they're written by the same people.
Yeah.
I mean, not necessarily for the same band, but, you know, you get music critics who are also publicists.
Yeah. Well, the example that I would give is that, well, sometimes the record label can afford to pay a publicist more than the magazine can afford to pay the music writer. So there's been times in my life, for example, where a good friend of mine, Ben Law, has written publicity materials for local record labels and local artists. And I mean, Ben can write better than just about every single music critic I know. So apart from the commercial intent of the press release, yeah, if music writing is really about being entertained, and I think part of that is, you know, yeah, there's some weird issues there. I haven't really unpacked them a great deal, but
the entertainment aspect of it.
No, about I suppose I've always pitched it as such that at some point the record labels worked out that they could just buy the writing that they wanted people to read, and so they did. And because they're for-profit businesses, they're not particularly interested in anything they can do to disempower the critic. Is a good business strategy. You know, this works for them, you know, and so they've done that quite effectively. And
just by offering people more money to be publicists than magazines do to pay critics?
I think by bringing up a whole generation of publicists who are just really canny about how the media works, much more so than the average music writer, who only has a fairly limited set of tools. So they just literally write sentences and can put them on the internet or on print. You know, a publicist that's only like a small part of their toolkit on how they do their job. I suppose it's a huge issue. Everett True's the guy to talk to about how it all fits together, but yeah, I mean the publicist gets paid a lot more than the music writer, and now has a lot more power than the music writer, a lot more.
Do you think in the long term reviewing other people's art has a detrimental effect on your own psyche in terms of how you view art? Like, does it cheapen it particularly if you're getting paid? If you're being paid to write about something, does it take away part of what you enjoy about listening to it in the first place?
Not really. I mean, not at the moment. Like, I mean, that kind of issue could have been in play at some other time in history and may come back too. But right now, the money is so bad that there's no way that the only people who are doing music writing are people. There's two people. There's the office intern who's doing it. Like at most broadsheets, you know, there's one or two music journalists, and then they give it to the young person because apparently young people know more about music than old people and can write better about it. So the intern's doing it and just doing a shit job because they don't really understand much. Like I didn't know anything about music when I was 15 or 16 or right through to probably most of my 20s. And then there's people who just love it so much that they're just kind of happy to do it anyway. They'd probably do it for free, and they virtually do anyway. What's the difference between $0 and $30 for a record review? It's like nothing. It's like not even a carton of beer.
So you've been in Brisbane this week for Big Sound.
Yeah.
Who'd you go see?
I saw the keynotes were good. I saw Billy Bragg. He was great. I mean, it's always a toss-up with people like that because what they know about the industry doesn't really map over the industry as it stands very well. Like, he talked a lot about the need to physically kind of insert himself into the music industry to get noticed and things like that. I don't know how how readily you could do that now. He was very charming. He told really great stories. It was good. I saw Amanda Palmer, and yeah, I probably had a bit more of a negative reaction.
You said before that you're not a big fan of her music or some of the things she does, but you think she's a great communicator.
Yeah, she is. That's undeniable. She is, hands down, in the whole, if you take music criticism more broadly about like the circulation of ideas about what music is and what it can do in the world and what can be done with music in the world, she's by far the most influential person communicating about that. It's not really writing. She has other ways of doing it. But yeah, she's getting what she says about music gets noticed 10 times more than the most powerful music critic.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I don't know why someone like her is so influential, really. I could point out like little bits and pieces of the story, but I've not really been able to like put it all together myself. Pitchfork.com is now hands down the most influential music website online. It's more powerful in terms of breaking bands than Rolling Stone or anything like that. And it deliberately diminishes the individual writer. Pitchfork has never produced a big writer. So like Rolling Stone has produced...
True. They produce, Grail Marcus and
Yep.
Lester Bangs and that. And you know them by their work.
Yep.
But
Hunter S. Thompson.
Hunter S. Thompson, yeah. But Pitchfork reviews because it was a review on Pitchfork, not because of who wrote it.
And apparently like it's quite a known in-house... It's not like a rule or a policy, but yeah, if you get bigger than the site, then they get rid of you and put someone else in. So no one has ever really become this big figure. Pitchfork is it's good business, I suppose. You don't want an artist, someone who's a creative type of person involved in your business who could potentially start to exert their power by being a celebrity of their own. So that's an aspect of it. Also the fact that now on the internet, everyone can write about music if they want to. And also the fact that the technology has changed to such that for a lot of people, they don't need to read 350 words about a record because in the time that they could do it, they could listen to it. So
they could find it and download it, have it on their whatever device.
I'm generally I'm not a believer really about music criticism. Like, it's where Everett and I sort of don't see, we're friends, but we don't see eye to eye in that. I think it might actually be on the way out. Do
you mean in its role as a tastemaker for people, as a gatekeeper of having an informed view and giving the general public an idea of what they should be listening to?
I think that role is completely finished.
Yeah.
I think it was completely finished, though. I deeply suspect before the internet, though. I think it was over, but well and truly kind of in the later part of the 90s. Like, I suppose when the internet's starting to happen, and I think maybe the internet is really exploiting broader societal ideas about stuff like that anyway. Again, I can't really sort of draw it. That's just a gut feeling. But in terms of a tastemaker, I mean, there hasn't really ever been one in my life. I mean, Everett was pretty influential, but he's the one person that I can think of that's like that. Even back when I was a kid, I was more interested in what Rolling Stone said than any individual writer in Rolling Stone. Even though it produced these people over the decades, I think what really needs to happen is that somehow they need to re-energize music journalism. Criticism is kind of fucked, and I don't know how to unfuck it. But music journalism, I just know that there's so much that could be done there, and I don't understand why it's not being done. I suppose it's money and clicks and the attention economy and stuff like that.
Do you think the future of music journalism is going to really cut out a lot of the middlemen of it, where be it distributors, but also journalists who have a sort of middleman role in deciding what gets to be popular, and it becomes just a system where it's strictly between the producer and the audience?
Yeah, it could do. Like, well, there's no investigative journalism really in music anymore. Like, it's gone. And I suppose that's because it's really expensive to produce. But I don't think that its value to the reader has been diminished at all. In fact, I think it's now really, really valuable. And the moment someone works out a way to sell investigative journalism again, then it seems like that will... there's no reason that I can rationally sort of see why it won't. Although the example, someone asked me this question the other night, that's why I'm a bit polished on it, is that Miley Cyrus at the VMAs, when that happened and she did her twerking bikini dance with her tongue hanging out and all that stuff, it sort of like the blogosphere and the internet and social media and all of the music websites just exploded forth with all of this opinion, criticism, right? Not journalism, just criticism. So, is Miley a racist? Is Miley too sexual for children now? Is America's favourite daughter being corrupted? Was it wrong that Robin Thicke did that with her on stage? Blah, blah, blah. Eons, days, endless days upon days of this commentary, criticism. No one went and interviewed Miley's manager, the people who choreographed the dance routine, the people who are on stage with her, who were not white. What did they think about her performance? How did it happen? How did it get structured? How much did MTV know about it? What does Ray Cyrus think? And of course Miley's not going to give a comment because she's the artist, so I don't mind her being secluded, but getting the comment from everyone else, I mean, that's the story. And no one knows. All we know is we had just speculation, endless speculation.
So do you think maybe the opinions of just everyone out there in social media has become more important than finding out what actually happened?
It's not more important.
I mean, is more important to the general public.
It's
more entertaining.
It's cheap to produce, and people click on it because the way that the social media works is that you sort of exercise your own identity by linking. So if you feel that Miley was behaving in a way that was racially kind of weird or sexually abhorrent, then you link to it on your feed and you can kind of indicate to other people that you share these beliefs about what's right and wrong. And so it circulates well and it draws clicks to the website. But then
page views, which generates ad revenue, which is what the whole web economy is really based on.
Yeah, so the model works as a business, but then we're now 3 or 4 weeks later and we as a culture don't know the story, which just seems weird to me. And if you could sell that story, if you wrote that story, somehow say you're a trustafarian and you had $2 million, you went, school, I'm just going to get the Learjet, fly over to the thing, I'm going to bribe everyone and get all the quotes that I need, get all the access that I need, and sell the story. I'm sure it'd get 1 trillion web clicks.
But no one's just really willing to do that.
No one's willing to do it. No one can afford to do it, and it wouldn't make as much money as the opinion piece. The aggregate of opinion pieces wouldn't make, which cost nothing to make, would make more than the well-argued, well-investigated, piece of music journalism.
Yeah, is it even possible anymore to have a model by which music journalism could operate in any sort of centralized fashion that comments on things that are really important, given it's so fragmented?
It's hard to see how it would work. Getting it done is easy, right? There's people out there. There's music journalists everywhere. If you could pay music journalists, they would do their job. It's not like we have we lack the skills as a writing community to do the work. It's just that you can't get paid to do it. So, I agree, I think, with all of that, what you just said, and I can't really see a way out of it. I suppose I'm pretty optimistic as a person, despite everything we've talked about in this interview. I feel like this interview is I was just joking. I was almost put on Twitter then while you're away. I was like, this interview is my shit life in music. It's not. I've had a great... I'm very optimistic and a wonderful time, but I think that I just, what's the end game of this though? It's like we're going to spiral into just endless stupidity. It just doesn't make, it's literally going to be like that movie Idiocracy. Yeah. Where are we going with this as a culture? And to me, it feels short term. Like it really feels short term. It feels like it feels like a moment in music history where, there's points in music history where all sorts of terrible, light, thoughtless, brainless stuff has had a real moment in the sun, and then we all go, oh God, no, stop.
And this is just one of them, that it'll pass.
Hopefully, or it'll just. The internet does a tremendous amount of great stuff too. I love the internet. Everyone loves the internet.
You've talked about how you think that the whole new digital distribution model is, eons better than the old record company model.
Yep.
Yeah, could it be? I guess in terms of journalism and promoting music, maybe there's just a technological solution that is going to emerge, like things like Bandcamp did.
Yeah, I think maybe. No one seems to be less interested in books about music. I've noticed this, like a long form book. Like, so if you're the sort of person that always kind of wanted to read the think piece in Rolling Stone instead of the reviews or look at the picture of Britney or something, then maybe you just go to the book now. And what we just need is like the Sub Pop of book publishers, not the Sub Pop of music.
Yeah.
And the other thing was that this energy that I'm talking about, like this desire to really kind of provide like a higher quality, more truthful, honest, more critical investigation of music, it might not manifest itself in writing. Like Chris Ott has been doing these videos of himself talking about music and splicing them up with examples, and like it's incredible stuff. So maybe the next Hunter S. Thompson's not a writer, it's like a guy on screen, like talking to you and showing you stuff, or traveling through with a cheap digital camera, doing the exact sort of stuff I was talking about with Miley, like kicking down the door of their choreographer's house or stopping them when they're taking the bin out and asking them questions or something like that, Yeah, maybe no one will ever get paid again. What will happen is that all the kids who are interested in music will kind of work together with really cheap technology to produce something. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't. Also, unfortunately, I've kind of long ago reached a point where I don't care a great deal too. The books that I want to get written aren't always being written, but enough good stuff comes out. Long form music journalism still comes out every year, and I don't have a lot of skin in the game. My academic wage obliterates my freelance wages. It's the point where when you start to have, I'm a 37-year-old guy with a long-term partner and, designs on maybe having a more straightforward life in the future. Music writing is probably not going to have a huge part of that, no more than it does now.
How do you think the music scene in Brisbane has changed since you started playing in bands?
It's professionalised. There's definitely this point where certain subsets of the Brisbane music industry have become more professional, more commercially focused, and better at doing that stuff. And what always happens is that the underground responds to what is happening in other parts of the culture on every level, right? So now we have a bunch of, like, the underground music in some ways is crustier and crazier and more chaotic and much less ambitious in some ways as well, or is ambitious in entirely different ways. Ambitious to be, insane instead of,
creatively ambitious rather than commercially.
Yeah, so I feel like what we've seen is kind of like it's not a strict binary, but we've definitely seen like a development of both the creative spectrum and the professional spectrum, and they become more separate, which makes me sad in a way, but also I think that having been someone who's been in a band that's really straddled those two things as they were kind of emerging, that it didn't really, it's not a big deal that pop bands have managers and a conference about their work and they get played on Triple J, and that seems good. And what also seems good is that a bunch of kids release stuff on cassettes and vinyl and play house parties and get recognised all over the internet. It's like, it's good. That in a nutshell, in my opinion, is the story of Brisbane since where kind of Andrew Stafford's book Pig City closes off.
And do you think that's Brisbane is a microcosm example of what's going on in the broader music community, both like nationally and internationally? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the internet has kind of changed things in that Brisbane is now, there's a local accent and a flavour that of every place. But Brisbane could be anywhere. It's just not. It's just what it is.
Are we moving toward maybe like a 3-tiered hierarchy where you have bands like yours that do it, and you've said in your circles that for some people music is an advanced form of leisure, like touch football, but not as lame and with more parties.
That's
so
true.
People who do it for the love of it, for the love of the music, for fun,
Yeah.
and I guess for their own creative purposes. But at this point, you don't have like any serious commercial aspirations. No Anchor, do you?
None.
No.
Yeah.
I guess the second tier would be bands that do have commercial aspirations, that do play the game, if you will, the Triple J game, the publicity game, and may or may not make it, or maybe they'll give up in 3 years. And at the top tier, you have the whatever decimal percentage of the people who do make it.
Yep.
And can make an entire career out of music, which could be in the whole country is probably less than 20 people.
It's about 200 from what
200?
I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is not a lot.
who can actually...
in any 1 year.
In any 1 year,
changes.
yeah. And who could make enough money to actually live the rest of their lives by playing music.
Yeah, be performers, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, countless people make money off music. They just don't play it.
Yeah. And I guess the vast majority of bands would probably fall into the middle category. At some point, they'll really give it a shot, and then they'll either give up or they'll become a band like yours and change their focus, change the reason why they do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, increasingly though is that other tier. I was going to call it the bottom tier. That's not right. The other tier, where you really don't, from the outset, you just don't buy into that other tier at all. You just say, you know what? What's great about music is that playing it for my friends and having parties and meeting people, and you don't ever really aspire beyond that. That a lot of the bedroom suck bands here in Brisbane, they sort of strike me that way. They're quite ambitious. Like, they make really ambitious creative records. They're really ambitious with their way that they tour. Like, they've done touring that far outweighs, like, Einon, for example, at its peak, have toured all across the US and Australia multiple times. But they're not really... I don't think you would struggle to find a single person in that whole scene that says, I expect to be a paid musician ever.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't have changed. Maybe when they were 15 they thought that, but their entire adulthood has been informed by this idea that they're just going to play music as fun, as leisure. And I say that stuff on the blog and a lot in my work, and it's not really directed at people like you and me, like or Triple Z, or just 90% of every single person I ever meet at a show in Brisbane. It's directed at everyone else who still in 2003 don't acknowledge that this is how it is. Like, anyone who's in funding, people who are in governance, people who are in education, they still assume that most musicians kind of want to have this career and are striving towards it, and they don't understand that there's this huge subsector of people that are not interested.
Why do you think there is that misconception?
I think it's relatively recent. I think, so everyone sort of talks about the history of this stuff. Now, punk's been, we've had punk for 30 or 40 years now, blah, blah, blah. But, we've only had the tools to be able to maintain a music career without actually having to really do anything for a couple of years now. Like, you can literally, we all know now that you can make a record, put it on the internet, get reviewed, have that music circulate internationally, put up video, all of that stuff, and you could probably do the whole thing and not spend a cent. Now, you might need your laptop computer, and you could literally do it all. And maybe it wouldn't look good, and maybe it wouldn't sound good or anything like that. But we're talking about a zero expenditure musical engagement, and people are taking that opportunity up now to do it. And it didn't exist even 10 years ago in the shape that it does now. So I think some people are struggling to deal with that, to know what to make of that. It's definitely a resurgence of an older idea about what music is and what place it plays in community and society and things like that. Also, it's hard to help someone who doesn't give a shit, or doesn't even want your help, or doesn't even really know what help is for. If you work for Q Music, you can't really help Kitchen's Floor. Not only do they not want your help, they don't need it. So,
They don't have... You're geared towards helping them get something they don't want.
And this is, I suppose, this is why it's hard to talk about it, and why I suppose you need a doctorate in cultural studies maybe to kind of fully start to work on this stuff, is that if they probably could help Kitchen's Floor, but we're talking about huge stuff then, not small. We're not talking about trying to get them a touring grant so they can stay in hotels when they go on tour, or trying to send them to South by Southwest so they can get discovered. We're talking about trying to improve noise ordinances in residential areas so that they can do the shows they want to do. We're probably dealing with, a whole bunch of youth services sort of stuff as well, and a general kind of shift. The biggest thing that you could do to help the musicians on that tier, of course, is to make music part of the Work for the Dole scheme. And that's where the advocacy should be going. If you want to help those guys, what you do is you just say that those tours and those albums, which they're putting their whole lives into almost, should at least just count for the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard to tackle.
Like kind of like what FDR did in the 30s, where he had that, what was it called? It was like he had all the public works and stuff to get people employed, but he had like a whole artistic thing where you could go out and be an actor or whatever and get paid by the government, something like that.
And Sweden and Iceland too. Like Iceland punches above its weight.
Yeah, totally.
And that's, they've got a population an eighth of the size of Brisbane, and they produce Bjork and Sigur Rós and Mum. And, what have we done on that international scale, like the Veronicas maybe, and the Bee Gees 30 years ago?
Yeah.
And that's because they treat the ability to play and interact and critique culture as a right of all citizens, in the same way that we treat being able to run around on the sports field as the right of all citizens. So that's the big shift that has to happen if people want change. Everything else is a Band-Aid. Yeah, get some touring grants, send some people out, have a music industry conference. That's nothing really compared to that societal shift that, people like me, I suppose, are going to spend the rest of their lives agitating towards. Since
Iron-On broke up, in February, Ross wrote a blog post explaining that he was quitting music. He hadn't, done any shows or recording for quite a while before that. But he said that he realised he'd only been fooling himself into thinking that it was fun. Did you read that post?
Yeah.
Could you identify with what he was saying with that?
Yeah, well, I don't think Ross has ever really enjoyed it in the way that I have. Not to say he hasn't enjoyed it, just not in the way that I enjoyed it. What I looked for and longed for with music was community and friendship. And it was the currency by which I achieved those things. Ross, he was about self-expression and other, I don't know, you'd have to get Ross in to talk exactly about what he was trying to do. So I sort of see a little bit of what he's saying exactly, in that, touring sucks a lot of the time. You have to really want more out of it than what the audience is going to give you. And so if you can't get those things, then it's not fun. Like if you're not in love with the romance of doing these things, then you're a bit stuck. I personally also don't care what Ross writes on his blog. Until he dies and he's never written another piece of music that he plays in front of other people, then I'm pretty sure, I don't know if that's actually true, that he'll stop playing music.
Oh, I think he stopped playing music for other people.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's still going to write songs and play them for himself.
Yeah, I believe that he thinks it's going to... I don't know. I suppose I'm a bit more optimistic that maybe he will, 5 or 10 years down the track, that there might be something else. But I don't know. In his own specific circumstances, I was really proud of him for doing it too. I may joke around now and say, he kids himself that he's going to stop playing music, but I was really proud of him when he stopped, because it was making him unhappy, and yet he'd invested a lot of time and energy into it, and it's a pretty brave move to just wake up and make any change in your life that drastic, let alone sort of walk away from something that's really kind of defined you as a person in the eyes of a lot of people for a while.
The title of the Iron-On's soul album was Oh the Romance, which came from something that you used to say to each other when you were doing something tedious, like loading heavy amps in the back of a van at 3 a.m. You've also said that music is every bit as monstrously repetitive as office work. Why do you still do it?
Because it still delivers me from, at its best, it still delivers me from mundanity. Like, it can be as mundane as office work, but it can also be an antidote to it. Like, it can still absolutely deliver me from that feeling about everyday existence. So, while it might be tedious and boring and things like that, it still manages to be exciting enough and transportive enough and transgressive enough to what I do with the rest of my time to be really valuable.
Ian Rogers, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you. Holy shit.
You can find the music of pretty much all Ian's bands online at Bandcamp, including No Anchor, Axon, which is spelt, by the way, AXXONN, Shaking Hell, and Iron On. Dr. Rogers' PhD thesis, Musicians and Aspiration, Exploring the Rock Dream in Independent Music, is available at the University of Queensland's eSpace website. I think it's only available for staff and students, though, who have a login. I couldn't quite find a way to get it for free. I have managed to read it before because my ex was a UQ student, and it is a really good, interesting read. He interviewed a lot of local Brisbane musicians for it. So if you're at UQ, or if you can otherwise find a way to get it, definitely check that out. Since I talked to Ian, he's not been making quite so much music, but he has been exploring a new side gig as a noir crime author. He published his first book, 4 Days, in 2015, and since then he's brought out another 4. I'm no author, but that sounds like a pretty productive regimen. They're all available online. Oh, he writes under a pseudonym, by the way. He writes as Ian K. Ryan, Ian spelt I-A-I-N. The band I talked about that sounded just like Sonic Youth, called the Wendy's, later changed their name and ultimately moved to Melbourne. They're now known as No Sister. They're very good if you want to check them out. That's all for this episode. I should probably plug my thing, because I forgot to plug the Harley Young Melbourne gig. One of the bands I play guitar for, Harley Young and the Haymakers, are going to be playing in Hobart at the Brisbane Hotel on July 14, and then in Brisbane at Tomcat on July 20. And we got a new single out. It's called Counting Song, and Harley, who has also been a guest on this podcast, made a cute little stop motion video for it online if you want to find that. All right. Hit me up at gimmeempathypodcast@gmail.com or on Facebook or Instagram if you want. Till next time, stay airborne.